Okay, everybody, let's talk about the differences between my old 394 XP, completely OEM Husqvarna saw, and my G395 XP that I just picked up. So, first of all, I'd like to say that I paid about $350 for this 394 XP, and I got a stellar deal on it, and it's rare to find them in any kind of running condition. It had no broken bits on it other than the chain brake flag was busted off the original clutch cover, which I replaced with a OEM Husqvarna clutch cover. It had a regular top handle on it. I went with the full wrap kit from Husqvarna, which includes the full wrap bar, of course, the inner and outer bar plates for your saw, which are much larger than the normal OEM, and the larger felling spikes. One of the big differences between these two saws is that my 394 comes with the factory low top air filter. As you can see, it fits inside the recess in this top cover, and it's a pleated nylon mesh air filter. In my opinion, it flows very well. I've never had a problem with it. I did add a little bit of grease to the edge of it when I first started using it, but now I just use it around the air horn portion, which is a rubber that stops fines from getting through to the carburetor. And this port right here, I add a little bit of grease there to keep the fines out. This saw has some updates done to it. I went to the temporary on-off switch that Husqvarna uses for their brush cutters, which is nice. I never forget to pull the recoil starter and not have the saw switched on, which is nice. You don't waste a lot of energy there because it's a big saw. It's 94 cc's to pull over, just like the G395. It has a larger handle than the G395. The G395 has the Husqvarna style 372 handle. I don't know what the part number for these are, but I'd like to find them. But everybody tells me that it's not a larger handle, but it is. It's a significantly larger handle. I updated this to the Husqvarna fill caps, which are flip caps. They flip out and they're a lot easier to get off, especially if you're wearing gloves. It has, let's see, regular style rim sprocket, and I also updated the factory muffler. It has a dual port on it, and I use the factory 288 deflector. There's an extra hole in there. It's a good setup. I used riv nuts to attach the deflector. It lets the saw breathe a lot easier and runs a little bit cooler here in the south where it can be hot. Now, those are the updates on this saw. So total cost, I have about $400 in this saw, which is incredibly cheap for a 394 all original condition in this shape. One of the things, besides the chain brake that was broken on this saw, was that the airbox insulator between the cylinder and the airbox was missing. I had to replace that, so the entire intake system had to come apart, and I had to slip that over the intake block. And that intake block is a solid piece of plastic with an impulse port drilled through it going to the base of the carburetor. As you can see, there's no impulse tube in the top of this carburetor. It goes through the intake port. That's a design that I'm not really a big fan of. If you get a crack or a leak in that intake block, which is solid, it can lean your saw out and destroy your cylinder and piston. And mostly just the piston, but sometimes if you run it long enough and try and compensate with the carburetor by enriching it, you're going to lean it out and destroy it. This carburetor does not have limiting screws on it. It's an older pre-EPA design. You can see it has high, low, and idle adjustment right here on the side. Regular screwdriver. one of the best features about the 394 is it's completely tunable from the factory. This saw functions very well. It's powerful enough to pull me right into a hardwood tree with a hungry chain. I have literally no complaints about the fit and function of this saw. It was treated well, I think, throughout its life, so it's lasted this long and it still runs well. I believe this model is a 94, so pretty old saw, pretty difficult to replace. So here I have the G395XP, and as you can see, it's got a high top, which I actually prefer the low top. Gives you a lot more room to get your arm between the handle and the saw, and it's not as awkward or bulky feeling. But they went with this automotive style air filter, and it does have a lot more area and a lot more space. Whether it flows better than that nylon mesh, I don't know. I mean, it could, but in my opinion, the little nylon mesh low top is an excellent air filter. It has the regular small bar plate on the inside of the clutch cover. It has the small dogs and the regular chain catcher. From the factory, it has no bar plate on the inside. It does have a rail guide for your chain on the bottom of the clutch cover. And it has the regular half wrap or top wrap handle on it. It feels pretty good. It doesn't feel like it's weak or anything like that. This saw has a regular on-off switch. It has the regular fuel and oil caps. And a couple things I noticed is that everything seems to be fitted pretty well to this saw. It doesn't feel like it has any grit or anything in any of the parts. The chain brake is really hard to take off, but a lot of them are stiff when new. Even my 394, since I replaced the clutch cover on it, that one is pretty stout to take on and off. Both saws have decompression valves on the side of the cylinder. I would highly recommend changing the one on the G395. The end of the plastic pin seems to blow off or get broken off sometimes, and it can't really fall into the cylinder like on a still model, so it's not a incredibly important part, but you'll have a hot little post made of metal sticking out of the side of your saw if you don't replace it. And factory options aren't incredibly expensive, or even a used one, which is most of the time what I use. Both of these saws have screened mufflers. I do not have an extra port put in this. I've done nothing to this saw. I haven't even fueled it yet or started it up. So I plan on adding another port to the front of this muffler to let it breathe a little bit better. And some things are going to change on this saw. And that's one of the other differences I want to talk about with these, is that this saw cost me $320 on sale. Nothing on it is OEM. It has most, if not all, the same features as my 394. But the 394 is becoming very difficult to find parts to replace to keep it a 394. It's actually cheaper to buy a actual 395 Husqvarna cylinder and piston and replace it on this saw and include the intake parts, because the 394 carburetor, cylinder are almost impossible to replace with new OEM parts at this point. They both have a tension adjustment screw right here at the front of the saw. That's one thing that hasn't changed with the 395. A lot of people consider it a pain in the neck, but I run a lot of vintage saws and I don't really have a problem with it. It is nice to have an adjuster in the clutch cover, but it's not a deal breaker for me. One of the things that I'm going to do is, this saw is staying completely OEM in stock. I've taken good care of it, and it runs very well. I see no reason to change anything on it. This saw, I'm going to change a lot of things on it, and I'm going to experiment, which won't detract from its overall value, because its overall value isn't as high as the 394. This saw is cheap. The parts are cheap. If I make a mistake and ruin the piston or cylinder, it costs me no more than originally what the saw cost me, which is low cost. And there are some very big differences between this 395XP style saw and the 394. The 394 cylinder has a single transfer in the piston ported design. So you have one hole in the bottom of the cylinder which transfers to one hole in the top of the cylinder for combustion. One of the upgrade features of the 395 style piston and cylinder is that the transfers are divided, which increases the velocity of the fuel charge and gives you a little bit more RPM and a little bit more power. So one of the nice things is that any update I make to the G395 will increase its power and probably make it a stronger saw than my 394. But my 394 is going to remain OEM and unmolested. And even if I want to experiment, obviously I can use the non-OEM saw to do those experiments with, and I'm not detracting from my original. Another difference between these saws is you can see my 394 does not have the mounting holes in the front for the full wrap bar kit's protector for the front of the case. And a lot of these 394s have a broken case here where someone slammed it into a tree or tried to break some things out with the spikes and broke the case on the front of the saw. The saw will still operate with a crack or a break in the front of the case, but certainly not what you'd want to buy a used saw with. It was a broken case. As you can see, mine's in very good shape. The 395 XP has a intake boot which connects the carburetor to the cylinder. It still has a plate which blocks the cylinder compartment from the air compartment. Keeps the saw cooler, I think, with an intake port boot instead of the block. I'm not a big fan of the blocks because they crack and warp with heat and time, and plastic doesn't age as well as a rubber boot, which you can replace fairly easy. It has the impulse port, which goes to the bottom of the cylinder or case so that you can pump fuel. So it still has metal clamps for your cover, spring mount AV on both saws. It's just a very good design. I've worked with an actual 395 quite a bit with milling, and they're just an incredibly powerful saw for what they are. Both saws have the choke right here, which sets your high idle. When you push it in, the high idle is locked. When you pull it, you hear it click, and now you're in regular idle mode. Both saws have rim sprockets and your adjustable oil pump, which goes to the bottom of the saw. Unlike the 288, where you have the adjustment on the side of the oiler, kind of difficult to get to. But I'm going to play with this 395 and do some things to it that I would not do to my 394. I like the 394 the way it is from the factory. Even if it's not faster, it's still a piece of history that we'll never be able to go back and recreate. So with that being said, the 395 is an excellent platform for me. The saw itself, this blue saw, is it built to the same standard quality of the 394? Absolutely not. And if you're going to buy one of these, you'll see that like even the handle inserts have a little bounce to them. Are they going to fall out of there? Probably not, but still the same. The fit and finish is kind of a little bit different. The handle feels about the same. It's a good rounded contour, but you've got a burr here on the plastic. I mean, but if you're concerned about that, maybe you should put more moisturizer on your hands, I guess. This saw also has a fully adjustable carburetor on it, unlike the factory 395s, which have limiter caps on it, because you're only supposed to have so much adjustment. This saw has complete adjustment on it. You can lean it out or richen it up beyond its operating function. So a lot like the 394. Some of these parts are pretty easy to replace. I'm gonna modify this one extensively given time, but I haven't even fired it up yet. So those are just some of the differences between my old 394 XP, which is a fantastic saw, and if you get a chance to run one, they're really torquey, maybe not as high revving as the 395 style, but boy, they're just a nice saw to run and drop trees with when you have to make a big cut, 30 inches or more. They're the tool that was designed for that job, and they do it very well. The 395, excellent, high RPM, will pull a 42-inch bar, no problem, when they're tuned correctly. And, you know, if you have big jobs and you're only going to do a couple, that might be the saw for you. I would recommend going over your aftermarket saw if you do buy one. And, you know, right from the factory, I don't think this is going to be a bad saw. It seems to be fairly well made. I haven't seen anything just looking over it for inspection that seems out of place, loose, or misaligned or broken right from the factory, which is nice. A lot of times if you buy something aftermarket, it may not be correct right out of the box. I've bought spark plugs from name brands that have been no good right out of the box. But I'll keep everyone updated and maybe fuel this thing up and make a short video of it running. Okay, first fuel and fire this G395. Make sure the decomp's pushed in. Have your choke pulled out. Switch on. Prime it up a little bit. Push your choke in. Well, there you go. Didn't take as many pulls as I thought. Seems to idle and run okay, and obviously the oiler is working quite well. So that's a good sign. I had to fiddle with my 288 quite a bit to get the oil, and hopefully I'll update after I make some improvements to the saw. Thanks for watching.